All right, thank you for staying with us. You're watching Daybreak on Trust TV. Time to take a look at our next discussion on the program. And we'll be talking about the crisis in Sudan and the efforts being made by the federal government to rescue some Nigerian students who are stranded in Sudan. A lot of countries are making effort, or some have even succeeded in evacuating their nationals, some of the diplomatic personnel in those countries. And we are looking at how can Nigeria ensure a safe return of Nigerians living in Sudan. And we have joining us virtually Group Captain Sadiq Shehu, who is retired but not tired, rather retired but not tired. He is Special Assistant to the President on Disaster Management and Technical Advisor to the Minister of Humanitarian Affairs, and so he'll be talking to us about this. Thank you so much for joining us on Daybreak this morning.
Thank you very much for inviting me.
Very well, thank you so much. Well, a lot really has happened in the past, I would say almost 2 weeks now, since the crisis in Sudan began, and we are understanding that we have more than 5,000 Nigerian students who are currently sort of stranded in Sudan. We heard from the authorities as to plans to begin evacuation from Tuesday, but that didn't happen. Instead, we're hearing about glitches and technical hitches responsible for why the delay, and we are seeing that other countries are already evacuating their own nationals, and so it has become a dire situation for Nigerians who are in Sudan. We cannot afford these delays, can we?
Thank you very much. Yes, when disaster strikes, either man-made or environmental disaster, or even health disaster like we saw with the COVID, earthquake, and like what that broke out in Sudan, it is very important that countries that have the diasporas, either students or normal residents in a country that is besieged, try as quickly as possible to bring those citizens out. It is the duty of government to do that. However, experience has shown that depending on the circumstances on the ground, sometimes immediate evacuation may not be the solution. Because when I say immediate evacuation, there are different terms that are used which have different connotations. When disaster strikes, you have three options depending on what is happening. You have the first choice of hibernation. This is hibernation where you are thinking whether the situation will improve, and then you watch the situation. So hibernation is that you pass the information to your citizens and they remain in place, maybe advising them not to go out, not to go to work, and stay in their residence. Even that is a big measure that you can take. When the situation, and as you are doing that, you are also watching the situation. How do you watch the situation? You watch what other countries are doing. You interface with other security agencies in embassies, in NGOs, in UN agencies. You also contact your contacts in the national security agencies, whether it is police, whether it is military. How do you see this thing going? Is it going to die down, or is it going to escalate? Now, depending on the information you get from this, you take a decision. Maybe you move from hibernation to relocation. Relocation here, I mean, it may not be the whole country that is besieged. Like in the case of Sudan, I think the most besieged is the capital, that is Khartoum. Now, relocation is that you think now of moving people not outside the country, but to another part of the country that is safer. That is relocation. If by some bad luck, it is the whole country that is besieged, or while you are thinking of relocation is also affected, then that is when you talk about evacuation. Why do you have to look at these three movements? Because sometimes when the situation is confused, when safety is not assured, even coming out to evacuate the people, whether it is by bus, whether it is by aircraft, you could also be targeted by the fighting forces. So the point I am making is that, again, countries will react, using the resources that they have. With due respect, countries are not all the same. There are countries that have standardized response teams ready. There are countries, if you mention all the countries that have gone, US, UK, these are countries that have military bases near to Sudan, in Djibouti, in Ethiopia, and other places. So these countries, by their resources, definitely they will move faster than Nigeria. But that is not to say that Nigerian government is not also doing something. Like I said, we are looking at the situation on the ground. Is it safer for these students to relocate? Is it safer for them to hibernate, or is it safer for us to evacuate them? As I'm talking to you, since this crisis broke, non-stop, there is an interministerial and interagency committee, comprising Ministry of Humanitarian Affairs, NEMA, Ministry of Health, Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Ministry of Defense, the Armed Forces, especially the Nigerian Air Force. All these are consulting to see what is the best, what is the best option to take. But then again, like I said, it's a factor of what are the resources that you have. Even the countries, again, that have the resources, you may find that you may not have the mobility resources to move everybody all at once.
All right.
So what does that mean? It means you have to prioritize.
All right.
Who do you take? Do you take children and women out? Do you leave diplomatic staff? Do you take people that are sick? Do you have pregnant women? So all I'm saying is that it is an interagency, interministerial effort, and every country will act, quickly in line with what it has at its disposal.
All right, Group Captain Shehu, we have listened to you, and I've listened to all the steps that you say should be taken. But why the government in Nigeria is in Nigeria taking these steps? The people, the Nigerians in Sudan, who are majorly students, I'm not too sure they're aware of all of these steps. So much so that we have the Association of Nigerian Students there telling them to converge on a certain place so that they can be moved out. And we have the federal government in Nigeria telling them to stay indoors. So why do we have these conflicting issues? And we also saw this morning the federal government warning the Nigerian students there against traveling on their own and all of that. Do you believe that the Nigerian students there are fully aware of the efforts being made right here in Nigeria?
Thank you very much. A very good question. In an emergency such as this, one of the planning factors is that the source of information has to be one. There has to be one person or one authority that is communicating. And in my experience, because I have participated in several evacuations, not even in Nigeria and other countries, the best person to communicate is the officials that are on the ground in Sudan. In this case, our diplomatic officials in Sudan are in the best position to pass the information because they know what is happening. However, with the advent of social media, with the advent of TV, that anybody can talk from anywhere and anybody is a press, definitely, again, you cannot, prevent the advent of having different communication, official and unofficial coming. And this communication may be contradictory, and it may also make people to take wrongful decisions. However, what I will advise both the government and the people that are besieged, either in this or in future cases, is better to listen, is better to have one source communicating what is happening. And the better the source, I think the best source is the source that is in the country where this problem is happening. At the Nigeria stage, the only information we bypass is maybe to parents and relatives telling them what we are doing. But as what is happening and what is supposed to be done, where people are supposed to assemble, we are supposed to believe the Nigerian officials that are in our embassies, whose work it is to be passing in this information. Yes, it is true. We have seen different information coming. But then again, like I said, maybe this is a mistake of not having one source of information. You talked about students evacuating themselves. Yes. It is the responsibility of a government, or if you are working for any international agency, to evacuate you if there is problem and there is need for evacuation. However, even in advanced countries, a citizen has the option of either following the government evacuation plan or self-evacuating. It is called self-evacuation. That is, on my own, I decide I cannot wait for the arrangement that the federal government is doing. I want to move. But the responsibility for self-evacuation lies with the individual saying self-evacuation. And it is very logical to understand. If they say Nigerians should assemble in point A, and you on your own or with your family, you decide that you are going to take your own risk, it will be difficult for people planning the evacuation to go chasing you to find out what you are there. So what you have done in essence is that you have taken the responsibility. So what federal government is doing is that stay and listen to what we are saying. If we say stay, it is because we found that staying at that particular time is the best option rather than moving to airport or moving to border. But if you take the responsibility to self-evacuate, the people planning will have no longer any responsibility for your safety as you have taken that into your own hands.
All right. We are seeing on the Punch newspaper this morning, and this is going back to my earlier question about the delays that were experienced yesterday, or I would say Tuesday, for the evacuation. We are understanding that logistics hiccups delayed the evacuation. We are seeing that as reported on the Punch newspaper. If you may give us an idea, what's the nature of these hiccups really?
Now, planning is very, very important. Prior planning. Global best practice demand that countries should have prior plans, written down plans, which are, clearly delineated roles for all the agencies. Like I said, evacuation is not the work of one ministry, it's not the work of one agency. It's not the work of only the diplomatic mission abroad, it's not the work of Ministry of Humanitarian Affairs or Health. Everybody has a role. But if you have a plan where everybody knows his roles, if you have the resources, you see the issue of evacuation or any emergency, it is an emergency. It is not a normal procedure. So if you have a procedure which you are applying during real time, like somebody has to approve finances, somebody has to ask later, such an arrangement cannot work in an emergency, because the difference in 30 minutes can make difference between life and death. So what I will advise as somebody who is conversant with evacuation procedures, as we have seen this during the COVID response, we have seen it during the xenophobic attack of Nigerians in South Africa, and we have seen this during the Russia-Ukraine evacuation, we need to have plans in place with well-delineated responsibilities, and our embassies having the resources to execute. Because in the long run, you need resources. You need material and financial resources. You need to have plans. In a well-written plan for evacuation, for example, if you ask me, I will advise every agency. Mind you, I'm talking Nigeria has one of the biggest diaspora in the world. We are the 20th country with the highest number of nationals living abroad. In Africa, I think only South Africa has more people. Has more people living abroad than Nigeria. So for each agency, what I would recommend is that, and this is an issue that both the Federal Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Ministry of Humanitarian Affairs, Ministry of Health, all have to be involved. In each foreign embassy or mission, you need to have a plan. What does the plan do? You will write the list of all citizens of Nigeria that are resident in that country, with their addresses, with their details, with their health needs. Is there a pregnant woman? Is there somebody that is hypertensive? All this should be detailed. This removes delay. You also identify the resources you have, even in the embassy. How many buses do we have? If we don't have buses, what contractor we have that we can call at a short notice that he can provide us with buses? What are the airports that are around that area? What are the seaports that are around that area? What are the safe havens? What I mean by safe havens, even within the country, let's say in Khartoum, ideally, global best practice, the Nigerian embassy should have a designated house or a designated compound where, if necessary, you can tell Nigerians, leave your house, go and stay there before we move you. Such a safe haven should be, properly catered with food stocks, with it is a very elaborate arrangement. You should also have a warding system. Even within Khartoum, I'm giving an example, like when you're talking now in Kano, you have Tudun, you have Sabongari. Let's assume Kano is in a foreign country. What you do is that in Tudun, you have what you call the warden. The warden is the Nigerian who is in charge of our 10 to 20 Nigerians living in Tudun, so that when crisis calls, he has all the numbers in what is called a communication tree, that once we have WhatsApp group now, he can tell them, you are to move here. This is what the embassy said. Right. You need to have that warding system in place. You need to know all the routes that are available, so that when one route is blocked, you know how to. So in essence, what I am saying, if you have a plan, it will reduce the delay we are seeing. If you do not have a plan and you are starting when the problem is on, definitely you are going to have delays, you are going to have problems.
All right, Group Captain Shea, it was a good thing you talked about plan. I saw some reports where people were surprised that the international organization were taken unawares, because according to those reports, tension has been building up between these two groups, the armed forces and the RSF, for a while. Don't you think that the Nigerian embassy in Sudan should have been better prepared, and maybe should have contacted the federal government about all of this before it happened on April 15th?
Yeah, earlier on I said when there is a sign of crisis, I have worked with the with the African Union as deputy head of security when the Egypt crisis started. Now, what you normally do as a security officer in the embassy or the person in charge of security, I have contacts with UN security officers. I have contacts with the security officers in the various embassies. I have contacts within the Sudanese armed forces or the police. So when crisis is going, I will take advice from them. How do you see this thing? Do you see this thing simmering down or do you see it escalating? However, every agency or every embassy will do that. But then now it is a matter of interpretation. The information I got, security officer A may decide, okay, I have enough evidence to order for evacuation. Another security officer might say, okay, by my judgment, yes, there is danger, but it's not good to evacuate now to happen. So there will be that individual differences. You do not expect all the countries to arrive at one conclusion. The information they get may be the same, but the conclusion or what you deduce from that information may be different. You can remember the last time that a security scare was given in Nigeria by some embassies. There are some that moved non-essential staff out of the country, whereas there are other countries that say, okay, we've had this thing, we don't think it is true, we'll say. So there are individual differences. I agree with you, communication and coordination with other agencies is very important, but what individual countries, what individual institutions do with the information they get is different. Some have, what can I say, a higher risk threshold. One other security officer may have a very low threshold. Once he sees this, he will say, okay, let's evacuate. But that is individual differences.
Okay, now, what kind of engagement or mobilization are we seeing with regards to this evacuation? We've not heard much about, the involvement of our military in this matter, considering the fact that we are going into a war zone, literally, to evacuate our citizens. So what sort of mobilization is there in that end? And are we having any kind of communication with the government in Sudan, even though we can say that it's sort of a collapsed system now, you don't even know who to talk to. But again, are we interfacing, at that level in terms of military-wise?
Thank you very much. I earlier spoke of an interministerial and interagency committee that is sitting and has been sitting since this crisis broke. In that committee, like I say, interagencies, all the relevant stakeholders are there. The military to the defense headquarters, the Nigerian Air Force, our defense attaché in Saudi Arabia, our defense attaché in Ethiopia, all of them are in the loop with the chief of defense intelligence under whom all defense attachés are there. So we are talking collaboratively with them. And what do? We want to identify what mobility resources do the Air Force have that we may need. What mobility resources the Navy have, because there is also a maritime corridor through the Gulf of Sudan. So we're looking at all this. Ministry of Health is there. Ministry of Foreign Affairs is there. NEMA is there. All the agencies that could contribute to an eventual rescue effort are there. So to answer your question shortly, we are in close collaboration with the Nigerian military, Nigerian Air Force, Nigerian Navy, Defense Headquarters, Defense Intelligence Agency. They are the ones that will advise us. We do not have military advisor in Sudan. But you see, this is where the importance of having the defense advisor in Ethiopia and the one in Saudi Arabia to, they do an area scan and let us know. They advise us. In fact, some of the actions we are taking are based on the information. We are here in Abuja. We cannot, if we say we are going to Sudan, it is likely the defense attaché in we're going to Ethiopia is a defense attaché that tell you, okay, on this route, this is how long it is, this is how treacherous it is. I advise you move or I advise you don't move. So we're doing that.
But in terms of communicating with the parties in this warring parties, I don't know, is it the armed forces we are in communications with, or is it the RSF we are in communications with, or we are not in communications with any of them?
Again, our defense attachés and our diplomatic, you have to understand, no matter how serious a situation in a country, diplomatic staff have a certain immunity. The defense attaché also is diplomatic staff. So what we are doing, like in this case of Sudan, you have two factions that are fighting with none that you can say is in full control of the government. So for you as an independent person that is caught up, who is looking of how they can do it, we have to talk to the two through our intermediaries, not for us talking to them. But again, here also you have to understand, even as the country has collapsed, there is the Sudanese ambassador here, there is the Egyptian ambassador here, there's the Saudi Arabian ambassador here, there's the Ethiopian ambassador here. We are talking with them.
All right.
We are talking with both parties because all of them control certain areas and all of them could harm our convoy as it is moving. So we have to get assurance from both of them before we decide on any action.
All right, yes. Talking about harming your convoy that is moving, there was a ceasefire, 72-hour ceasefire declared on Monday. So the more we delay, how safe is this operation going to be, the evacuation operation, considering that very soon the 72-hour line will elapse? And in any case, even with the 72-hour ceasefire, we hear there are gunshots being heard around the country. How safe do you think this operation will be?
Thank you very much. Again, I reiterate that whether you are hibernating, that is remaining in place in your house, whether you are relocating, whether you're evacuating, will be informed by several factors. Yes, there's a 72-hour window for people to evacuate, but then we have to look at many factors into it. We have to ask our ambassadors, we have to ask our defense attaches. If we are moving to Ethiopia, remember, when there is crisis as there in Sudan, apart from the two factions that we know, the government forces and the RSF, there are other bandits that are operating and looting in the country. So even if you have assurance, the people that give you the assurance for 2 hours are the two main major fighters. The bandit of the road has not given you an assurance. So you have to really reconnoiter. You have to really find out, if I'm moving from Khartoum to the border with Egypt, how safe is the area? Is it okay? There are no bandits of the area. That will inform. If there are bandits of the area or other non-state actors that are fighting in the area, it means you cannot just rush blindly because there is 72 hours window and then you move, because you are moving from one frying pan to fire. In fact, in some of the borders like Ethiopia, there is a war going on in Ethiopia. So all these are factors. Is a combination of these factors that will decide, is it evacuation, that is leaving the country, that is best? Is it hibernation, people advising people to remain in-house, that is the best? Is it a relocation, moving Nigerians as much as possible to a particular place that is relatively safer within the country? It is these options that you have. So please, what I want people to understand, evacuation is not the only option. It's not always the best option. There may be need for hibernation, there may be need for relocation, but all in all, we will continue to tell government and stakeholders, it's a learning process. It's a learning process. Some countries have more advanced response mechanism than other countries. Our aim is to always try and improve our response mechanism.
Okay, Group Captain, I'm just imagining the nature of this evacuation and how it is that we are planning this evacuation. We are talking about thousands of students here. We're talking more than 5,000 students, according to the Minister of Foreign Affairs. So, and if we are saying we are moving students from Khartoum to the nearest safest place, which means that will be by road, because like we understand that the flying zone, there is no flying, it's a no flying zone in Khartoum, so there will be no airplane. So it means going by road and using vehicles to move, students. And I'm wondering, are we really aiming to evacuate up to 5,000 people, or how are we planning this, and in what batches is this going to be, and how would the movement be away from Khartoum?
Thank you very much for a very important question. Earlier on, I mentioned the word prioritization. Maybe I do not explain. You see, evacuation, especially in emergency, is not the ideal situation. Ideally, we will be you plan for the best and then also prepare for the worst. Now, with due respect, I don't like drawing attention from countries that have more capacities, but in this answer, I have to do that. Now, when you read carefully, when people say America or UK have moved their citizens, it is not actually true. What Americans do, what other countries do, is to have a priority list. Because I don't think any country, if you look, most of the countries that use their military aircraft, they are using the C-130. The C-130, the biggest version, can only carry 124 people for you. That is, if you don't have stretchers, you don't have luggage. So all these countries that use C-130, what they are doing, they prioritize. And prioritizing is part of planning. When a disaster strikes, you have to prioritize people based on their needs, based on the work they do. All these countries that evacuate, I can tell you there are still their diplomatic mission staff there. But what will they do? In general, you will prioritize families, women that are pregnant, people that are sick, children. You give them priority. We have been saying, in the case of Nigeria, we have been saying students. It's because we are prioritizing students. That is not to say, if I remember, as far back as 10 years ago, General Obasanjo, when he was president, said there are about, I think, between 5 to 10 million Nigerians in Sudan. But some are permanent residents. If a Nigerian is a permanent resident in Sudan for over many years, he is safer than a student who just came to study, who doesn't know anybody. So there are the priorities. So while we have that 5,500 number you are saying, the reality is that when it comes to embarkation on that bus, the embassy staff has to do a prioritization. Prioritization, but not based on who is the rich man children, who is the poor. No, prioritization based on need. Those most in need, those who do not have, like for example, you do not expect the ambassador of Nigeria in Sudan to be on the plane coming back. He has to stay on the ground. That is what the duty demands. You do not expect the defense attaché to enter the aircraft for defense, or to enter the bus and say he's leaving. Those people have to stay because they are providing essential services. If you have a doctor or nurse, they have to stay behind. But then you look at the student, even among the students, there may be some that are sick. The student that is sick has priority over a student who is well.
All right.
So this is the issue. While we are talking of that 5,500, in the ideal situation, the government is looking at everybody, but depending on the resources that are available, priority has to be given to certain people. That is just how it is.
All right, Group Captain Shehu, the tricky thing about this is the fact that there are lots of students involved. And so we can imagine the age range of these people. So it's only natural that they will be distraught and confused and afraid, as we have seen on social media. So apart from the official statements that we have seen by the government saying, oh, we're going to evacuate you, is there any other arrangement by the Nigerian embassy in Sudan to engage these students so that they can be psychologically, so that they can be calm and, so that they are not so afraid as we have seen on social media?
Luckily for us, the student union in Sudan, they have leaders, they have an association. So what we try to do is periodically, update them on what the country. I acknowledge different sources of information, which is not good for us. Some sources are dubious, some sources are just mischievous, while some are official. So we try to engage. Yesterday, during the meeting of this interministerial committee, I recall what the permanent secretary, Ministry of Humanitarian Affairs, Dr. Sani Gorzo said. He said that fleeing is a natural reaction to somebody who is afraid. So even while we discourage people to do self-evacuation and flee, we understand some will flee. That is not to say that government is not going to do with them. But the truth is that people that have followed the directives and stayed in one area, it is easier for us, it is easier for them to be evacuated. So we try as much as possible to send messages both to the students that are there and to the parents that are there that are concerned who do not defend of their students, to tell them that we are not sleeping, we are trying within the resources to see how we can salvage the situation, but also to make them understand that while they hear country A has evacuated, country B has evacuated, is a function of the resources that they have available. It's a function, like I told you, US and UK, they have military bases just by the border of Sudan. So it is something of them of moving within 30 minutes, they are there. In fact, as an aside, I can tell you, American forces can reach any African country within 4.5 hours.
Right.
Within 4.5 hours. That's how we are not that resource. So we have to do what we can do. We will continue assuring the students, but I assure them to please accept only the information coming from official sources.
All right, Group Captain Shehu, we have seen that 150 million naira has been approved and 40 buses have been released for this exercise. Would that be enough?
Well, enough is relative. Enough is relative. If you take what it will take
all of these people
to fuel a chartered aircraft, and if you put the number, you are taking of how many iteration of flights, how many back and forth, how many do you need, how many aircrafts do you need, how many trips they are going to do. There could be medical expenses which you cannot foresee. Even that, there are things that could happen. Somebody could be in want of medicine. Somebody could be in want of inhaler. Remember, from what I heard, even water. So I will say it's a very good move by the Nigerian government, but it's the circumstances that will dictate whether this these resources are marked are enough or not. Especially when you remember, whenever there is war or crisis, the cost of services and goods increases. The person who serves, I'm just giving an example, who serves 10,000 for the hiring of his boss during crisis might demand 100,000. So it is good we have this thing, but better still for future this thing, I would like to see our embassies having contingency money for emergencies, because with due respect, we are talking frankly here. If during an emergency you want back and forth from the foreign country to Abuja to presidency before money is released, that is not the way to to respond to emergency. With due respect, I have to say that.
All right. All right. Well, thanks for your honesty, really, and for being very candid with us. Let's move slightly away and look at the general crisis in Sudan. Really, what would it take to bring stability to Sudan, given the fact that virtually all the conflict resolution mechanisms have seemed to have collapsed right now? So you have two major warring parties who, in the country, at least from within the country, there is no capacity to, prevail on these warring parties. What else will bring stability in that country?
Well, in international politics, we talk of the principle of subsidiarity. And the international community has accepted subsidiarity. What does subsidiarity means? If there is a conflict in any area, the regional organization, all the countries around that area are the first point of call to try and resolve the crisis. Unfortunately, our regional and sub-regional agencies in Africa in general, whether you talk of IGAD, whether you talk of ECOWAS, they are not powerful enough sometimes to clamp down on warring parties to ensure that they come. So in this case, recognizing the weakness of the African Union, of IGAD, which Sudan belongs to, and other African agencies and the UN, it has to be a collaborative effort. The intergovernmental agencies like IGAD, like African Union, like United Nations will do their own, and also European Union, from where the fighting forces might draw support either in terms of logistics or in terms of armament, or in terms of even food and water to survive the conflict. So all this will have to come together and put pressure, extreme pressure on both sides to ensure that they do not have the instruments to prosecute the war. Once that is done, I think they'll be forced to face reality and walk inwards and sit down and settle. Also, the Sudanese government, the Sudanese citizens, they have a big role to play. They are watching their country and their children and wives and daughters getting killed unnecessarily. Maybe it will need also a great uprising, even though they are unarmed, by the civilians in Sudan to ensure that they neither support one side or the other and show that what we need is peace, because they are being used as pawns. If you are an ordinary Sudanese and you say you are supporting this general or this general, I think you are just wasting your time. What you need is peace for your children to grow, for you to pursue your business, for your children to go to school, for your wife to go to hospital. That is what I will advise. But at the same time, while we are doing that, unfortunately, Africa has become the home of conflicts. If you look at all the peacekeeping missions since United States, every time you'll find the majority of peacekeeping missions are deployed in Africa. We are the ones who are fighting. And unfortunately, we are the ones who do not have strong regional or sub-regional organizations like NATO. You see, like NATO as it is now, it can clamp down on any NATO member to stop what it is doing. I think that is what we should be doing. Our conflict resolution mechanism, especially the kinetic one, has to be, upped together with a diplomatic, together with economic pressure that can be brought to bear on any area leader or any area country to bring it back to the negotiation table. Right, that is what I have to say.
All right, Group Captain Shehu, you talked about the role of the citizens. These are people who stood outside for many days protesting until Omar al-Bashir was ousted. And now this started. I'm sure they didn't envisage something like this was going to happen. Do you really believe that the Sudanese people will still believe in the entire process to want to come together and still fight for the peace in the country?
Okay. In general, political leaders or coup leaders anywhere, they claim to be working on behalf of a certain type of people, either based on religion, either based on ethnicity, or just a political affiliation. So what I am saying, whether somebody is a politician who sees power, whether he's a military person who sees power, he claims to be talking on behalf of a certain group of the people, maybe not the whole country. So that is to say, both generals now, they may be claiming to fight for one side or the other of the Sudanese population. What I am calling for is for the Sudanese population to uprise and say, we are not for General A or General B, but we are for peace in the country. Once a leader or a coup leader or a military leader or even a politician who seizes power, realizes that the people he said he's talking on their behalf are no longer with him, I think he has lost his bargaining chip. That is the idea I want to bring here.
Okay, looking at the international dimension to this conflict, there are some who have even said that the warring party have alliances with other countries outside their country. So we heard that there is likelihood of the Russia-Ukraine war influencing what's happening in Sudan. We've also heard the UAE mentioned, the Egypt mentioned, and all that. These are neighbors and allies. How difficult really is it to come to a negotiating table looking at all this interest?
Yes, there is that theory that the Sudan conflict is a war by proxies, either by some neighboring African countries or the divide between US, NATO, and Russia in the fight in Ukraine. Whatever it is, that's why I call for a concerted effort. With due respect, there is no African country that I know, maybe with some exception, the South Africa, that can manufacture weapons that it can prosecute a war. So what do I mean? All the logistic, the weaponry that is gotten by the Sudanese side, they got it from these countries that we mentioned. Even though, again, we must underline that both parties have denied that they are fighting for one side or the other, that they are just on their own solving Sudanese political problem, as they say. So what I am saying is that if they can be staffed, if there will be international commitment, not hypocrisy, to stop the war in Sudan, the people that are supporting Sudan, Sudan is not an arms manufacturing country. It depends a lot on exports and from on imports from other countries. If the country can be clamped upon by the international community, that will assist. But unfortunately, again, sometimes international diplomacy is full of hypocrisy. What somebody says publicly is not what he's doing internally. But we hope that the international community, because in general, Sudan has been a very bad experiment. Sudan was one country, and then there was this issue of blacks animist versus Arab whites in the Sudan as a whole. And the international community really felt that it was necessary to liberate the blacks and give them as countries. So we had South Sudan and the other Sudan. But what did we have since that day? Since that day that this country was divided into two, we never had peace either in the South Sudan or in the North Sudan as it is. The people who are fighting for liberation suddenly turned on themselves and started fighting each other. So Sudan is a very bad experiment for the international community, and I hope that realization will make the international community to come together and clamp down on the fighting factions to ensure that they stop.
All right, Group Captain Shehu, in the midst of all of this is a huge humanitarian crisis coming up. How do you think the international community can assist? As we speak, hospitals are running out of medicines and all of that. And then we hear about 400,000 persons from Sudan have moved into Eastern Chad and all of that. How can the international community support?
The international community during humanitarian work, that is the nature of humanitarian work. There has to be a sacrifice. You have to continue even while the conflict is going. What I see happening is that intermittently, unless we are lucky that this conflict ends, intermittently there will be humanitarian ceasefire for humanitarian corridor to carry goods and services to people that are beleaguered. Other countries in the neighboring countries who are themselves not rich, like Ethiopia, like Chad, also have to be assisted by the international community to accept the influx of refugees and IDPs that will be flooding those countries, because they themselves also do not have their destiny. So this is how it is going to continue. They will be fighting, and then international community will ask for a humanitarian ceasefire that we have these 72 days, where in the the humanitarian agencies will quickly rush in and supply. But suffering will be there, because before those humanitarian ceasefires are declared and even obeyed, we don't even have certainty that it will be obeyed. Despite everything, again, you raised another point. We still hear, despite these 72 hours, I've listened to BBC, I've listened to channels, even on the other radio stations. There are still reports of fighting. So what does that tell you? Apart from the two main groups that gave commitment, you have 72. There are other groups that are not under the control of these two generals who could fire. So again, it brings the issue of moving or staying where you are. Which one is best? But in all ramifications, it is going to be a very tough survival for our own citizens that are in Nigeria, and for the in Nigeria that are in Sudan, and for the Sudanese people for some time to come.
All right. Well, thank you so much. Quite an unfortunate development in Sudan, really. Thank you for the insights and perspectives. Group Captain Sadiq Shehu, retired Special Assistant to the President on Disaster Management and Technical Advisor to the Minister of Humanitarian Affairs. We look forward to having you on Daybreak once again.
Thank you very much. A pleasure.
Thank you. Well, that's our show for today. In case you've missed, you can always catch up across all our social media platforms and also on our YouTube live stream. My name is Ayuba Ilya. Thanks so much for joining. Bye for now.
Thank you for welcoming us into your homes this morning. My name is Stella Yaji. Join us same time, same station tomorrow. For now, do have a very pleasant day.